I Can't Help Falling in Love with a Foxgirl. Part 3. The lights dimmed in a slow, deliberate wave. Not sudden darkness. Enceladus didn't do anything suddenly. Everything here was engineered for flow. For transition. For emotion to build instead of break. And then the stage came alive. Echoes of Terra stepped onto the stage to a roar that felt like pressure against the walls themselves. Thousands of voices rose at once. Not chaotic. Unified. A living sound. Robert stood in the backstage corridor just off the main viewing line, where he could see the stage without being seen from the front. Security headset in his ear. Tablet in hand? But none of it mattered much right now. Because Lyra had just stepped into the light. And the entire dome changed with her presence. The first song began. Then the second. Then the third. Each one smoother than the last. The band moved like they had done this 100 times, which they had, but tonight had a different weight behind it. Lyra was sharper than usual. More expressive. More present. Kasia noticed immediately. So she knows, she murmured backstage. Pepper glanced up. Knows what? Kasia smirked. That something's happening tonight. Pepper didn't respond. But she didn't disagree either. Robert kept scanning. Habit. Structure. Focus. But his eyes kept drifting back to the stage. Every time Lyra moved, he tracked it unconsciously. Every time she turned slightly toward the wings, he straightened. As if she might somehow see him through the structure itself. Naomi stood nearby, reviewing performance data on a wrist console. You are watching her more than the crowd, she said. Robert didn't look away. Yes. That is inefficient for security. I know. A pause. Then Naomi added. It is also understandable. That made Robert exhale slowly. Not relief. Just acknowledgement. On stage, Lyra moved through the set with increasing confidence. Her voice carried cleanly through the dome. Every note precise. Every transition smooth. But between songs, brief moments of silence before the next cue, her eyes kept shifting. Not toward the crowd. Toward the wings. Toward the place she knew he would be. And every time she found it, she smiled slightly. Small. Almost invisible. But real. Kasia leaned toward Pepper mid-performance. She's doing it again. Pepper didn't look away from the security feed. Doing what? Kasia gestured subtly. The checking if he's their thing. Pepper finally glanced up. She knows he's backstage. Kasia nodded. Yes. A beat. But she's checking anyway. Pepper returned her focus to the feed. I see. Kasia grinned. I think she likes him. Pepper sighed. That is not news. The set continued. A softer ballad. Then a rhythmic piece that brought the audience into synchronized clapping. Then something older. A classic from their Earth-inspired catalog. The crowd responded to everything. But Robert noticed something subtle. Lyra's timing occasionally shifted. Slightly. Not mistakes. Adjustments. Like she was unconsciously syncing herself to something offstage. To him. Naomi stepped closer to Robert. You are affecting her performance stability, she said. Robert blinked. That sounds like a bad thing. It is neutral. That doesn't help. Naomi considered. Then, it is noticeable. Robert swallowed. That's worse. Between songs, Lyra turned slightly toward the wings. Just for a moment. Her gaze passed over the backstage corridor. And she saw him. Robert was partially in shadow. Watching. Focused. Still. She didn't wave. She didn't break performance. She simply held his gaze for half a second longer than necessary. Then turned back to the audience. But her ears lifted slightly. And her tail flicked once behind her. Kasia saw it from stage right. Oh, she whispered. Pepper looked over. What now? Kasia smiled. She found him. Pepper groaned softly. Of course she did. That moment hit Robert harder than he expected. Not because she saw him, but because she didn't stop performing when she did. She just acknowledged it. Then continued. Like it was normal. Like he was part of the environment now. Naomi noticed his posture change. You are reacting. Robert nodded faintly. Yeah. To being seen? No. A pause. To being included. Naomi studied him. Then said, That is progress. Robert almost laughed. Doesn't feel like it. Naomi nodded. It rarely does. The set moved toward its midpoint. Energy rising. Audience louder. Lighting shifting warmer. The dome responding to emotional pacing algorithms embedded in the show design. Kasia was now fully in performance mode herself, moving with the rhythm, occasionally throwing glances toward Robert just to confirm he was still functioning. Pepper stayed focused on security. Naomi stayed focused on Robert. Lyra stayed focused on the stage, but kept returning, again and again, to the wings. A brief silence. The band transitioned. Lyra stood still under the spotlight, breathing evenly. Then, just before the next song began, her eyes moved again toward backstage. Robert was still there. Still watching. Still steady. And she smiled. This time, she didn't hide it at all. Kasia leaned toward Pepper. I'm calling it now. Pepper sighed. What? Kasia grinned. This is going to explode later. Pepper rubbed her temple. I know. Kasia's grin widened. And I'm going to enjoy every second of it. The next song began. And the concert moved forward. Towards something none of them were fully prepared for yet. Not even Robert. Not even Lyra. The final note of the set faded like a held breath finally released. For a moment, the entire dome stayed suspended in silence. Then, the crowd erupted. Not just applause. Not just cheering. A wave of sound that rolled upward through the structure like it was trying to lift the roof itself. Echoes of terror stepped back from the stage as lighting shifted into intermission mode. Warm tones replaced performance lighting. The stage transformed. And Cosmic Nova began setting up for their segment. The opening band hit the stage with a completely different rhythm. Where echoes of terror carried emotional weight and melodic nostalgia, Cosmic Nova brought driving energy, modern, electric, slightly chaotic in a way that kept the audience engaged but relaxed. It was a pressure release. A control break. Perfectly timed. Backstage, the transition gave everyone a moment to breathe. Or at least, it was supposed to. Echoes of terror returned to the dressing suite together. The door closed behind them with a soft mechanical seal. Sound from the dome dulled immediately. Inside, everything felt smaller. Quieter. More real. Kasia immediately collapsed onto the couch. That was legally exhausting, she declared. Pepper stood by the security console, reviewing live feed adjustments. Naomi sat down but didn't relax. Lyra removed one of her performance accessories carefully, setting it aside like the show was still fragile. And Robert stood near the doorway. Still half in performance mode. Still scanning. Naomi watched him for exactly 6 seconds. Then spoke. Sit down. Robert blinked. I'm fine. Naomi pointed at the chair. Sit down. A pause. Robert sat. Kasia immediately smiled. Oh wow, she said. She used the command voice. Naomi didn't look at her. Correct. Robert exhaled slowly. The adrenaline from the stage hadn't fully left him. His hands still felt slightly disconnected from reality. Lyra sat nearby, quietly drinking water. Occasionally glancing at him. Not intensely. Just often enough that it was noticeable. Robert noticed every time. Naomi leaned forward slightly. You performed adequately, she said. Robert gave a small, tired laugh. That sounds like a performance review. It is. Kasia pointed. I give it 10 out of 10 emotional damage. Pepper didn't look up. That is not a metric. Kasia nodded. It should be. Naomi stood. Walked directly in front of Robert. You are delaying. Robert looked up. Delaying what? Naomi tilted her head toward Lyra. You have not spoken about the final performance. Robert immediately tensed. Cash's eyes lit up. Oh? Pepper groaned quietly. No. Naomi continued anyway. You should. Robert hesitated. Lyra looked up slightly at that. About what? She asked. Robert swallowed. Then stood. Slowly. I wanted to ask you something. Cassia leaned forward instantly. Oh, this is happening. Pepper pointed at her. Do not interfere. Cassia sat back. I am only observing loudly. Robert stepped closer to Lyra. Close enough that the room noticed the shift immediately. Even Cassia stopped talking. Naomi stayed silent. Pepper stopped typing. Lyra tilted her head slightly. Waiting. Robert took a breath. Then, the final song. Lyra's expression softened slightly. Yes? I want to do it with you. A pause. Lyra blinked. You already are. Robert shook his head. I mean, properly. Understanding began to form in her eyes. Slowly. Then, emotion. Her ears lifted slightly. You mean? Robert nodded. Yes. Lyra didn't respond immediately. Not because she didn't understand. Because she did. And it mattered. Cassia whispered loudly. Oh my God, it's happening. Pepper elbowed her without looking. Lyra stood slowly. You're asking me to share the last song as a duet? Robert nodded again. Yes. Her tail moved once. Slow. Careful. Then faster. Why? She asked softly. Robert hesitated. Then answered honestly. Because I don't want to do it alone. That did it. Lyra's expression changed immediately. Softened. Warmed. Then she smiled. Not the stage smile. Not the public one. Something smaller. More personal. Okay, she said. Robert blinked. Okay? Lyra nodded. Yes. Then, quieter. I want that too. Cassia covered her mouth with both hands. Pepper stared at her. Naomi wrote something on her tablet. Cassia whispered. I'm going to die here. Pepper replied flatly. No, you are not. Cassia pointed. Emotionally, I already did. The room didn't immediately return to normal. Something had changed in it. Not obvious. Not loud. But present. Robert stepped back slightly, processing. Lyra stayed where she was, still looking at him. Neither moved away quickly. Naomi finally spoke. You will need rehearsal alignment. Robert nodded. Yes. Lyra nodded too. Yes. Cassia raised a hand. I volunteer as emotional disturbance manager. Pepper immediately responded. No. Cassia lowered her hand. Worth a try. A soft announcement echoed through the ship intercom. Intermission ending in 5 minutes. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Focus returned. Energy tightened. Preparation resumed. But now, there was something different underneath it all. A shared understanding. A decision made without needing to say much more. Lyra looked at Robert one last time before standing fully. We'll be ready, she said. Robert nodded. Yeah. Cassia stood dramatically. All right, lovers, back to work. Pepper groaned again. Naomi simply said. Incorrect terminology. But emotionally predictive. Cassia grinned. I'll take it. And as they moved back toward the stage, the final song of the night was no longer just part of the set list. It was something else entirely. The announcement echoed through the backstage corridors. Intermission has concluded. Echoes of Terra, prepare for stage re-entry. The moment had arrived. The band gathered near the stage access tunnel, while Cosmic Nova finished their final song. The audience was already cheering. Waiting. Anticipating. The excitement inside the dome felt almost alive. Kasia bounced lightly on her feet. Pepper checked her earpiece one last time. Naomi adjusted her drum gloves. Lyra stood quietly beside Robert. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The conversation from the dressing room still lingered between them. The duet. The final song. Their song. Robert's stomach twisted. Lyra noticed immediately. "You're nervous." Robert laughed weakly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." "A little?" Lyra smiled. "Okay. Very obvious." That earned a genuine laugh from him. A small one. But real. The stage manager gave a signal. 30 seconds. The girls moved toward their positions. Robert remained backstage. Watching. Waiting. Trying not to think too far ahead. The second half began with a roar from the audience. The crowd had somehow become even louder than before. Thousands of voices filled the dome as echoes of terror returned to the stage. Lights flashed. Music swelled. And the show continued. The first few songs passed quickly. The crowd sang along. Waved lights. Danced in the aisles. Every performance was met with thunderous applause. Lyra looked completely at home beneath the lights. As if she had been born there. As if performing for 20,000 people was the most natural thing in the universe. Robert wished he understood how she did it. Backstage, he tried to focus on security. Tried being the important word. Every time he checked his watch, another song had passed. Every time he looked toward the stage, the end of the set seemed closer. Too close. Kasia eventually noticed him from across the stage. During a brief instrumental section, she looked toward the wings. Saw Robert standing there. Saw the expression on his face. And immediately started grinning. That grin alone made Robert suspicious. Very suspicious. A few songs later, Lyra found him again. Not physically. Just with her eyes. A brief glance backstage. A small smile. Then she returned to the audience. But Robert felt strangely calmer afterward. Only for a minute. Then the nervousness returned. Naomi appeared beside him. Seemingly from nowhere. Robert was beginning to suspect she could teleport. "You are spiraling again." Robert sighed. "Probably." Naomi folded her arms. "How many people are in the audience?" Robert blinked. "What?" Answered the question. "About 20,000. Naomi nodded. "And how many are important?" Robert immediately knew what she was doing. "One." Naomi nodded once. "Correct." Then she walked away. Just like that. Robert stared after her. "That can't possibly be all the advice." Without turning around, Naomi replied. "It is." The next song ended. Another followed. Then another. The concert moved steadily toward its conclusion. Every song bringing the final performance closer. Every applause making Robert more aware of what awaited him. Meanwhile, Lyra seemed unusually happy. Even for her. Her birthday alone would have explained some of it. But there was more. A warmth. A brightness. A constant tendency to look toward the wings whenever she thought nobody was noticing. Unfortunately for her, Kasia noticed everything. During a brief transition, Kasia leaned toward Lyra. "What are you smiling about?" Lyra immediately looked away. "Nothing." "That's a lie." "It isn't." "It absolutely is." Pepper sighed from the opposite side of the stage. "Can we focus on performing?" Kasia pointed dramatically. "I am focused." "No. Emotionally focused." "That's worse." The audience laughed at whatever they thought was happening. Which only encouraged Kasia. As always. Backstage, Robert watched the exchange and couldn't help smiling. Then immediately remembered what was coming. The smile vanished. The setlist continued. One song. Then another. The dome glowed beneath thousands of lights. Saturn shined beyond the station's massive viewing panels. And the night slowly moved toward its most important moment. Eventually Naomi appeared beside him again. This time she didn't say anything immediately. She simply stood there, watching the stage, watching the crowd, watching Robert. Finally she spoke. The next 3 songs. Robert swallowed. He knew what that meant. 3 songs left before the finale. 3 songs before he stepped onto the stage. 3 songs before he faced 20,000 people. His hands suddenly felt cold. His heart began beating faster. Every instinct told him to stay backstage. To remain where he belonged. Where nobody was looking. Where nobody expected anything. Naomi looked at him. Robert. He took a breath. Yeah? Her voice remained calm. Steady. Certain. The same way it had been during every practice session. One person. Robert closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then nodded. One person. Not 20,000. Not 5 billion viewers watching across the solar system. Not reporters. Not fans. Not headlines. Not history. Just one person. Lyra. When Robert opened his eyes again, he looked toward the stage. And found her immediately. She was singing beneath the lights. Completely unaware of what was waiting at the end of the set. Completely unaware that the next hour would become one of the most important nights of her life. 2 songs remained. Then 1. And somewhere deep inside himself, Robert finally made peace with what he was about to do. Not because he wasn't afraid. He absolutely was. But because some things mattered more than fear. And Lyra mattered more than fear. The final song approached. And for the first time all night, Robert was ready. The final song approached. The audience didn't know it. The station staff didn't know it. Most of the band didn't fully know it. But backstage, Robert's heart was beating hard enough that he was certain someone could hear it. The previous song ended. Thunderous applause filled the dome. 20,000 people stood beneath the lights. Millions more watched from homes, ships, stations, and colonies throughout the solar system. The cheers rolled through the massive structure like waves. And Robert suddenly became very aware of exactly how many people existed. His hands felt cold. His stomach felt hollow. His mouth felt dry. Every survival instinct he possessed had a very simple recommendation. Run. Naomi appeared beside him. Almost magically. As usual. She looked at him calmly. The final song. Robert nodded. Yeah. You remember? Robert managed a weak smile. One person. Naomi nodded. One person. Then she stepped away. Nothing more needed to be said. Out on stage, Lyra finished speaking to the audience. Her smile was bright. Warm. Comfortable. Natural. Everything Robert wished he felt at the moment. Kasia suddenly stepped toward her microphone. A mischievous grin already forming. Pepper immediately recognized the look. Oh no. Naomi sighed. He has been announced. Kasia raised the microphone. Before our final song tonight. The audience immediately cheered. Kasia smiled wider. We have a special guest. The cheering grew louder. Robert closed his eyes. Here it came. Kasia pointed dramatically toward the stage entrance. Robert Clark! The audience erupted. The reaction shocked even Kasia. Thousands of voices immediately filled the dome. Cheers. Whistles. Applause. People standing. People waving signs. People shouting his name. And then somebody yelled. Knife guy! The entire audience laughed. Then somehow became even louder. Backstage, Robert stared at the floor. I am never escaping that. Pepper patted his shoulder. No. Kasia's voice echoed through the dome. Come on out, Robert! We're waiting! The audience began chanting. Not perfectly. Not together. But close enough. Robert! 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 Robert swallowed hard. This was happening. There was no escape route. No emergency exit. No clever engineering solution. No security protocol. Just him. He took a deep breath. Then another. And stepped forward. The audience exploded again. 20,000 people. All watching. All cheering. All looking directly at him. Robert immediately regretted everything. Then he looked across the stage. And saw Lyra. Everything quieted. Not physically. The audience was still roaring. But inside his head. Everything narrowed. One person. Just like Naomi had said. Lyra's eyes widened. A smile immediately appeared. Not the performer smile. The real one. The one she only seemed to use around him. Robert walked toward her. Slowly. Trying very hard not to trip. Kasia leaned toward Pepper. I think he's terrified. Pepper nodded. He is. Lyra stepped beside him. Close enough that he could hear her breathing. Close enough that the crowd seemed very far away. You okay? She whispered. Robert laughed nervously. Not remotely. To his surprise, Lyra squeezed his hand. Just briefly. The gesture was small. The effect was not. The band took their positions. The lights softened. The audience slowly quieted. A different atmosphere settled across the dome. Everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Even if they didn't know exactly what. The opening notes began. Soft. Gentle. Familiar. Can't help falling in love. A collective murmur passed through the audience. Recognition. Affection. Anticipation. Lyra sang first. Her voice floated effortlessly across the dome. Beautiful. Warm. Perfect. Robert felt the old fear returning. The fear that he wasn't good enough. The fear that he would fail. The fear that everyone would see it. Then Lyra looked at him. Only him. And he remembered. One person. Robert began singing. The first line came out clean. Then the second. Then the third. And suddenly he wasn't thinking anymore. He was simply singing. The audience grew quieter with every verse. Listening. Watching. Feeling. Robert and Lyra had listened to this song together countless times. Talked about it. Shared it. Loved it. And somehow that familiarity carried them forward. Halfway through the song, Robert gently placed his hands on Lyra's waist. The movement felt natural. Almost inevitable. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. Then softened. Her arms slipped around his shoulders. The audience immediately reacted. A collective sound of approval moved through the dome. Kasia was grinning so hard her face hurt. Pepper was trying very hard to remain professional. Naomi looked mildly satisfied. The song continued. Slowly, Robert and Lyra began moving together. Not choreography. Not performance training. Just a simple slow dance. Two people moving with the music. And for a few minutes, nothing else existed. Not the crowd. Not the cameras. Not the station. Not the tour. Not even the band. Just the song. And each other. The final verse approached. Neither wanted it to end. The audience didn't seem to want it to end either. The final notes lingered in the air. Then slowly faded away. Silence. 20,000 people sat motionless. Emotional. Completely invested. Robert looked at Lyra. She looked back. Neither spoke. Then Robert leaned forward. And kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't performed for the audience. It was gentle. Simple. Real. When he pulled back, both of them were blushing. Lyra's face had become an impressive shade of red. The audience immediately exploded. Cheers. Applause. Whistles. Laughter. Celebration. Robert smiled. Then slowly raised the microphone. Happy birthday, Lyra! The entire dome erupted again. Louder than before. For a moment Lyra simply stared at him. Then her eyes began to shine. Emotion hit her all at once. The duet. The song. The kiss. The crowd. The birthday. Robert. Everything. Her arms wrapped around him immediately. Holding him tightly. Not caring who saw. Not caring about cameras. Not caring about 20,000 witnesses. Robert hugged her back. The crowd loved every second of it. Somewhere in the audience a voice shouted, "Way to go, knife guy!" The entire dome erupted into laughter, including Robert. Lyra buried her face briefly against his shoulder. Still smiling. Still emotional. Still trying not to cry. But the night wasn't over. Not even close. Because Robert still had one more surprise. And nobody on the stage, not even Lyra, had any idea what was about to happen next. The applause continued. And continued. And continued. The audience simply refused to settle down. 20,000 people stood throughout the Performing Arts Dome, cheering for Lyra's birthday, cheering for the duet, and cheering for the unexpected kiss that had just happened on stage. Lyra was still holding Robert's hand. Neither seemed particularly eager to let go. Kasia noticed immediately. Of course she did. "Oh, look at that," Kasia said into her microphone with a grin. "They forgot how hands work." The audience laughed. Lyra immediately blushed again. Robert wasn't doing much better. Pepper covered her face briefly. Naomi looked upward toward the ceiling. Predictable. Eventually the cheering began to calm. The crowd settled back into their seats. Most assumed the concert was over. After all, the final scheduled song had already been performed. The duet had happened. The birthday announcement had happened. The kiss had happened. The show should have been over. Instead, Robert stepped toward the center microphone. The audience quieted almost immediately. Curiosity replaced excitement. 20,000 people watched him. Waiting. Robert swallowed. He still wasn't completely comfortable speaking in front of large groups. But this mattered. And for once, he wasn't thinking about himself. He looked toward Lyra. Then toward the audience. Then back toward Lyra. "A few months ago," he began, "I found something unusual." The audience became even quieter. It was an old vinyl record. A few murmurs spread through the crowd. "I found it inside an abandoned storage safe that had been buried for centuries." The dome was silent now. Everyone listening. Robert continued. "The record was badly damaged. Most people would have considered it unsalvageable." He smiled slightly. "But I'm an engineer." That earned a small laugh. "So I kept working on it." He paused. Months of restoration. Reconstruction. Guesswork. The audience waited. And eventually, he looked toward Lyra. It started playing. The band exchanged confused glances. Even Pepper looked curious. Kasia tilted her head. Naomi folded her arms. Robert took a breath. Then continued. "Some of you may know this story." A few people nodded in the audience. "In 1955, a song was recorded on Earth." The dome became very still. Over the centuries, almost all surviving copies disappeared. A few historians and music enthusiasts in the audience immediately sat straighter. The only surviving evidence that the song had ever existed was a damaged recording containing part of the first verse. Murmurs spread. People were beginning to understand. The first verse was authenticated centuries ago. Robert nodded. It proved the song was real. But the rest of it, he looked around the dome, was believed lost forever. Now the audience was completely silent. Kasia slowly turned toward Naomi. "Wait." Naomi blinked. Then her eyes widened slightly. Pepper sat upright. Lyra stared at Robert, completely focused on him. Robert smiled. A nervous smile. A proud smile. "I found the rest." Silence. Absolute silence. The audience needed several seconds to process what he had just said. Then whispers erupted throughout the dome. "No way. Impossible. Is he serious? The lost song?" Kasia's jaw actually dropped. Pepper looked stunned. Naomi looked genuinely surprised for perhaps the first time anyone had ever seen. And Lyra simply stared at him. Because suddenly she understood. This was the second part of her birthday gift. Robert looked toward the band. I gave everyone sheet music a few days ago. Kasia blinked. Pepper blinked. Naomi blinked. Then all three realized what they had rehearsed without knowing what it was. Kasia pointed at him. You sneaky human! The audience laughed. Robert smiled. Then looked toward Lyra again. Only Lyra. The musicians moved into position. The dome lights softened. The audience fell silent once more. Nobody wanted to miss a single note. Robert stepped closer to the microphone. His heart was pounding. Not because of the crowd anymore. Not because of stage fright. Not because of history. Because Lyra was looking at him. Only Lyra. The first notes began. Soft. Gentle. Beautiful. The audience immediately realized they had never heard this melody before. Not completely. Not like this. The music carried an unmistakable feeling of another age. A different earth. A different time. A love song preserved across centuries. And then Robert began to sing. Whoa, my love! The first words drifted through the dome. Gentle. Clear. Emotional. Several people in the audience immediately gasped. Music historians recognized it instantly. The surviving first verse. The legendary fragment. Proof that the story was true. The fragment humanity had known for centuries. But this time, the song didn't stop. It continued. And that's when everyone realized what was happening. This wasn't a reconstruction. This wasn't a tribute. This wasn't a cover. They were hearing the actual lost song. The complete song. For the first time in centuries. People sat frozen in their seats. Crew members stopped moving. Security personnel stopped checking their monitors. Even Cosmic Nova stood backstage listening. Nobody wanted to interrupt history. Robert continued singing. His voice growing stronger with every verse. Every line. Every note. And throughout the entire song, he never stopped looking at Lyra. Not once. The audience noticed. The band noticed. Kasia noticed most of all. Halfway through the song she leaned toward Pepper. He is absolutely singing that directly at her. Pepper smiled. A small one. Yes. Naomi nodded. There is no statistical ambiguity. Meanwhile Lyra stood motionless. Her eyes glistened. The song wasn't simply beautiful. It was personal. A gift. A declaration. Something found, restored, protected, and brought back to life. Just like the relationship they had been building since Earth. As the final verse approached, Lyra's eyes became wetter. Her tail swayed behind her despite every attempt to stop it. And when Robert reached the final note, the dome remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood they had just witnessed something that would be remembered for decades. History. Music. And love. All sharing the same stage. And Lyra had never looked at anyone the way she was looking at Robert now. The final note faded. Slowly. Gently. Like the last light of a sunset disappearing beyond the horizon. For several seconds, the Performing Arts Dome remained completely silent. 20,000 people. Millions watching throughout the solar system. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to be the first person to break the moment. Robert lowered the microphone. His heart was still pounding. Not from fear anymore. Not from stage fright. Not even from standing in front of the largest audience he had ever faced. His attention was fixed on only one person. Lyra. The Vulpine singer stood motionless a few feet away. Her eyes glistened beneath the stage lights. Tears had begun to gather. Not from sadness. Not even close. From happiness. Pure happiness. The kind of happiness that becomes too large to contain. Robert swallowed slightly. Suddenly unsure what to do. The audience watched. The band watched. The cameras watched. Lyra took a step toward him. Then another. Then another. Her ears were forward. Completely forward. Not a hint of hesitation remaining. Her tail was swaying rapidly behind her. No longer trying to hide it. No longer pretending. Kasia immediately noticed. Oh. Pepper noticed too. Naomi smiled slightly. A rare event. Lyra stopped directly in front of Robert. Close enough that neither needed a microphone. For a second she simply stared at him. Robert smiled nervously. Happy birthday! That did it. The tears finally escaped. One rolled down her cheek. Then another. And then Lyra launched herself at him. The audience gasped. Robert barely had time to react before Lyra wrapped both arms around him and hugged him with all the strength she possessed. Robert laughed in surprise and instinctively caught her, holding her tightly. The crowd immediately began cheering. But Lyra didn't seem to hear any of it. Her face was buried against his shoulder, holding him, refusing to let go. The tears continued. Happy tears. The kind that come from feeling loved, wanted, chosen. For nearly a minute she simply stayed there. And Robert held her. Not caring about the cameras. Not caring about the audience. Not caring about anything except the woman in his arms. Eventually Lyra pulled back slightly. Just enough to look at him. Her eyes were still wet. Her cheeks were red. And she was smiling. The most beautiful smile Robert had ever seen. The audience collectively made an emotional sound. Even the crowd was invested now. Kasia had completely given up pretending not to enjoy this. Pepper looked suspiciously emotional herself. Naomi quietly observed what she would later describe as the predictable outcome. Lyra looked into Robert's eyes. And then forgot one very important thing. Her microphone was still on. The entire solar system was listening. Millions of viewers. News stations. Fans. Reporters. Other musicians. Everyone. And Lyra forgot every single one of them existed. Because at that moment she was only looking at Robert. Her voice came out emotional. Soft. Certain. You're officially mine. Lyra's eyes widened. Realization hit. The microphone was still on. The entire dome had heard her. The entire solar system had heard her. Her face immediately turned bright red. Robert, Before she could finish, Robert gently pulled her closer. Then he leaned toward the microphone. Deliberately. Knowing exactly what he was doing. And smiled. And you're mine. For a moment, absolute silence filled the dome. Then the audience reaction was somehow even louder than before. Lyra stared at him. Completely speechless. Now both of them were blushing. And neither had any place left to hide. Silence. Complete silence. The audience froze. The band froze. Even Robert froze. Lyra blinked. Realization arrived. Slowly. Then all at once. Her eyes widened. Her ears immediately flattened. Her face turned bright red. Bright red. Kasia was the first to react. She doubled over laughing. Actually laughing so hard she nearly fell to the stage floor. Oh my stars! Pepper immediately covered her face. Naomi turned away. Not because she was embarrassed. Because she was trying not to laugh. And failing. Lyra finally realized what she had done. Her microphone was still active. Every speaker in the dome had broadcast it. Every live stream had transmitted it. Every viewer had heard it. The entire solar system. All of them. Robert looked at her. She looked at Robert. And somehow her face became even redder. Kasia was laughing too hard to breathe. Pepper finally managed to speak. Well? A pause. I suppose that's public now. The audience exploded. The loudest reaction of the night. Cheers. Applause. Whistles. Laughter. Celebration. People stood. Many were crying. Others were cheering for Robert. Others were cheering for Lyra. Most were cheering for both. One voice near the front yelled, "Way to go, knife guy!" Another yelled, "She picked you!" That somehow made the crowd even louder. Lyra immediately buried her face against Robert's shoulder again, trying unsuccessfully to hide. Robert laughed softly, then wrapped an arm around her. Protective. Comforting. Warm. After a few moments she peeked back out. Still blushing. Still emotional. Still embarrassed. But smiling. Because despite the embarrassment, despite the audience, despite the cameras, despite Kasia laughing herself into another dimension, she didn't regret saying it. Not even a little. And as the cheers continued to shake the dome, one thought crossed Robert's mind. The entire solar system now knew exactly how Lyra felt about him. And honestly, he was perfectly okay with that. The dressing room door slid shut behind them with a soft hiss. And for exactly 2 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Kasia broke first. She slowly turned her head toward Lyra, toward Robert, then toward Pepper, then toward Naomi. I need everyone to acknowledge something. Pepper sighed immediately. No. Kasia ignored her. This is now officially the most emotionally expensive concert in recorded history. Robert coughed lightly. I think that depends on how you define emotionally expensive. Kasia pointed at him. You don't get to lawyer this moment, knife guy. Lyra was still sitting on the couch. Still red. Still trying to process what had just happened. Her tail had not stopped moving since they left the stage. Not even slightly. Kasia suddenly stood up. Very dramatically. Like she was about to perform on stage herself. Oh no! Pepper muttered. Kasia cleared her throat. Then she pointed at an imaginary person in front of her. Soft voice. Gentle acting. Robert! She leaned forward slightly. Then she hugged the air in front of her. Very slowly. Very intentionally. Like she was recreating the exact moment. Then she switched posture. Shoulders straight. Voice deeper. Now impersonating Robert. And you're mine. Silence. Naomi blinked. Accurate reproduction. Pepper immediately pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Kasia, please stop reenacting political events. Kasia snapped upright again. No, this is important. She pointed between them. This is how legends are made. Then she leaned back in again, dramatically repeating the hug motion. You are officially mine. She switched again. And you are mine now. Lyra made a sound halfway between a groan and a laugh and buried her face in her hands. Robert was openly trying not to laugh. Failing slightly. Pepper just looked exhausted in a long-suffering way. Naomi nodded again. Repetition confirms behavioral imprinting. Kasia pointed at her. Don't make it science. At that point Lyra finally peeked out from her hands. Can we not relive it? Kasia immediately shook her head. No. Then she sat back down. Absolutely not. That moment is going in the hall of emotional decisions forever. Robert exhaled. That sounds like a threat. It's history, Kasia corrected. Pepper stood up. All right. Everyone is alive. Nobody collapsed. That's enough for tonight. Kasia raised a finger. I almost collapsed. Pepper looked at her. You always almost collapse. Kasia nodded. There. Lyra slowly leaned back against the couch. Still red. Still smiling slightly now. Still holding on to the memory like she didn't want to let it go too fast. Robert sat down a little farther away, but not too far. Kasia watched them both for a second. Then smirked. So are we calling that a duet, or a diplomatic treaty? Pepper immediately pointed at the door. Out. Kasia stood up. Worth it. She left still laughing to herself. And for the first time since the stage, the room got quiet again. Not awkward. Just soft. Lyra glanced at Robert. Robert glanced at Lyra. Either of them spoke yet. But the silence between them didn't feel empty anymore. It felt settled. Like something had finally been said that didn't need to be repeated. And somewhere far away, The solar system was just beginning to wake up to what had happened. News feeds, messages, replays, headlines forming, and one very confused woman named Lynn about to find out her friend had just become the most talked about man in human space. Part 10. Quiet time after the storm. The door to the dressing room finally stayed closed. No stage lights. No cameras. No audience. Just the soft hum of the Enceladus station outside and the distant echo of a concert that had already become history. For a long moment, neither Robert nor Lyra spoke. Not because they didn't have anything to say. Because for once, they didn't need to rush it. Lyra was still sitting close to him. Closer than she had been before the concert. Her tail had finally slowed down, but it still occasionally brushed against his arm like she wasn't fully ready to let go of the contact. Robert glanced at her. Then looked away. Then looked back again. Lyra noticed and smiled slightly. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" Robert asked. "Like you're checking if I'm real." That made him pause. "Maybe I am." That earned a soft laugh from her. Not loud. Just warm. She shifted closer. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. A quiet settled in again. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Robert finally spoke. "I think today might be one of those days that people talk about for a long time." Lyra nodded slowly. "I think I'll be embarrassed about it for a long time." Robert smiled. "I don't think you should be." She glanced at him. "Easy for you to say. You only accidentally became part of a solar system-wide broadcast." He shrugged. "I think we did that together." That made her quiet for a second. Then softer. "Yeah." A pause. The kind that doesn't need to be filled quickly. Lyra's hand shifted slightly. Then found his. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just natural. Like it had been heading there the whole time. Robert looked down at it. Then gently held it back. Lyra didn't look away this time. "Robert?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" Her ears tilted slightly forward. "What happens after all this?" He didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't want to say something careless. Finally he said, "I don't know what happens to the tour." A pause. "But I know what I want to happen between us." Lyra's grip tightened slightly. "What?" Robert exhaled. Then looked directly at her. Not avoiding it anymore. Not hesitating. "I want to keep this." A small pause. "This us." Lyra didn't respond right away. Her eyes softened. Then she leaned forward and gently rested her forehead against his for a moment. A quiet, intimate gesture. No audience. No performance. Just honesty. "I want that too," she said softly. Robert's voice dropped slightly. "I love you, Lyra." For a second she froze. Just slightly. Like the words landed deeper than anything else that night. Then her expression softened completely. "I love you too, Robert." No hesitation. No performance voice. Just her. And for a moment, either of them moved. Because saying it made it real in a different way. Not broadcast real. Not stage real. Personal real. Lyra squeezed his hand once. Then smiled. "We're probably going to have to survive Kasha teasing us for the rest of our lives now." Robert gave a small laugh. "Worth it." Lyra leaned slightly into him. And this time, either of them looked away from the quiet they were sharing. Not even when the station outside shifted. Not even when distant announcements echoed through the halls. Not even when reality tried to come back in. For a little while longer. They stayed there. Holding hands. Breathing normally again. It didn't take long. Not even an hour. In fact, it was already spreading before Lyra and Robert had even fully left the Enceladus stage. Someone had clipped it. Then someone else re-uploaded it. Then multiple feeds synchronized it. Then the official broadcast archives flagged it as high-impact cultural event. And suddenly, it was everywhere. The screen cut in abruptly. A news anchor sat in front of a holographic replay of the concert. Her expression was very carefully controlled, which meant she was absolutely struggling not to react like a normal person. Tonight's Echoes of Terror performance on Enceladus Station has resulted in what analysts are calling an unprecedented public emotional broadcast event. The clip played behind her. Lyra's voice. "You're officially mine." Robert's response. "And you're mine." The anchor paused. Very briefly. Then continued. This exchange occurred in front of approximately 20,000 live attendees and an estimated multi-billion stream audience across the solar system. A second pause. Reactions have been significant. He said it back. This is not a drill. Knife Guy 1 Vulpine emotional dominance confirmed? We just witnessed history. People everywhere were replaying the clip. Cafes. Spaceports. Residential towers. Engineering bays. Entire rooms full of strangers watching the same moment on loop. Lyra hugging him. Robert holding her. The kiss. The declaration. The return declaration. One commentator whispered. That wasn't a performance. Another replied. That was a decision. The anchor cleared her throat. Relationship analysts have noted a rapid increase in cross-species cultural engagement interest following the broadcast. She paused again. Then added. And also a spike in search queries for Knife Guy. The hologram behind her showed thousands of fan posts. Half emotional. Half chaotic. All loud. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Lynn had just made herself tea. She was mid-sip when her holoscreen blinked with a trending alert, top priority. She frowned. That can't be good. She tapped it. And immediately froze. Robert. On a stage. A massive crowd. A duet. A kiss. A lost historical song. Saturn in the background. A woman hugging him like her entire world depended on it. Then the audio. You're officially mine. Silence. Then. And you're mine. Lynn slowly set the cup down. Very carefully. Like sudden movement might make reality worse. What? She replayed it. Once. Then again. Then a third time. Each time her expression got slightly more confused. Then slightly more concerned. Then finally. Deeply resigned. She leaned back in her chair. I leave him alone for, what, a few weeks? A pause. Why is there a space princess now? Her holoscreen immediately auto-opened a second feed. Lyra/Robert declaration event, full recording. Lynn stared at it. Long silence. Then. He said I love you? Another pause. He said I love you? She put her head in her hands. This man cannot go anywhere without causing international emotional incidents. Her holophone immediately chimed. Incoming message. Robert Clark, live location, Enceladus Station. Status, active. Status tag. Unavailable, emotionally occupied. Lynn just stared at it. I am not prepared for this. She took another sip of tea. Then immediately stopped. I am absolutely not prepared for this. The anchor concluded. Experts agree this may mark the beginning of a new cultural era in public performance-based relational expression. A pause. Or at minimum, a very complicated tour schedule. The dressing room door had barely closed before Kasia stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. Like she had been waiting her entire life for this exact moment. She clasped her hands together. And smiled. I would like the record to reflect something. Pepper didn't even look up. No. Kasia continued anyway. I said it. Robert blinked. Said what? Kasia pointed directly at Lyra and Robert. I said this was happening. Lyra immediately buried her face in her hands. Please stop talking. Kasia ignored her. I said there was emotional synchronization. Naomi nodded. There was. Kasia snapped her fingers. I said there was duet bonding. Pepper sighed. There was. Kasia pointed at the ceiling. I said they were orbiting each other emotionally, Robert muttered. You used the word orbiting? Kasia leaned in. I was correct. That did it. She walked in a small circle like she was presenting a trophy she had awarded herself. I would like to thank my instincts, my observational skills, and also literally everyone who doubted me. Pepper rubbed her forehead. Kasia, nobody doubted you. Kasia stopped. They should have. Lyra peeked through her fingers. Can you please stop celebrating our relationship like it's a scientific discovery? Kasia gasped. It is a scientific discovery. Naomi nodded again. High confidence confirmation. Lyra groaned. Robert laughed quietly. You're enjoying this too much. Kasia pointed at him. You sang a 1950s lost song to her while looking into her soul in front of 5 billion people. A pause. I am underreacting. Pepper finally stood. That's enough. Kasia immediately sat down. Fine. Then, under her breath. I was still right though. Eventually, the noise settled. Not outside, the station was still buzzing, but inside their small pocket of space, things softened. Lyra didn't move far from Robert the entire time. And Robert didn't seem interested in making her. Every few minutes, she just reached for his hand again like she was double-checking he was still there. And every time, he would hold it back without hesitation. At one point, Lyra leaned in slightly. Are we always going to be like this now? Robert thought for a moment. Probably. That made her smile. I'm okay with that. She kissed his cheek. Then immediately hid her face again like she was embarrassed by her own happiness. Robert laughed. You're going to run out of hiding spots. Lyra muttered. I refuse to accept that as a problem. Later, Robert stepped a little aside. Lyra stayed close enough that their shoulders still almost touched. He opened his holocall. Lynn answered almost instantly. Too instantly. Like she had been waiting. Robert. Her expression was warm. Relieved. And very, very amused. I saw everything. Robert sighed. Of course you did. Lynn smiled. You two are going to give the entire solar system emotional whiplash. Robert glanced back at Lyra. She makes it pretty easy. Lyra waved slightly at the holocall. Lynn immediately smiled wider. Oh, I like her. Lyra blinked. She likes me? Lynn nodded. She absolutely likes you. Robert leaned slightly. So, I wanted to ask you something. Lynn tilted her head. Go ahead. There's another concert coming up. He paused. Would you come? Lynn's expression softened immediately. You want me there? Robert nodded. Yeah. A pause. I think you'd like it. Lynn smiled. I would love to. Lyra visibly brightened. You're coming? Lynn nodded. And I expect front row access. Robert laughed. Done. Lynn leaned back slightly. Then her eyes narrowed playfully. Also. Robert groaned. I know that tone. Lynn smirked. Don't forget to invite me to the wedding. Lyra immediately froze. Robert choked slightly. Kasia, somewhere in the background, yelled. I called that too. Lynn laughed. I'm joking, mostly. Then softer. But I am very happy for you. A pause. You found someone good. She looked at Lyra. And you did too. Lyra smiled softly. Thank you. The call ended with warmth instead of urgency. Across the solar system, broadcasts continued. Breaking, echoes of Terra romantic event now classified as cultural turning point. Fan reactions reach record levels. Knife Guy merchandise spikes across 3 systems. Vulpine fan clubs issue official statement, we support this union. One analyst on screen said calmly. We are witnessing the emergence of a new kind of celebrity relationship dynamic. A pause. And possibly a new genre of music. The screen cut again. Lyra and Robert holding hands backstage. Kasia laughing in the background. Pepper looking exhausted. Naomi taking notes. and Saturn hanging silently outside the station window like it had seen all of this coming long before anyone else did. The excitement of the evening was finally beginning to fade. Not the news coverage. Not the endless replays. Not the headlines. Those were still everywhere. But inside the tour ship, for the first time all day, things felt peaceful. Robert and Lyra sat together on a couch in one of the common lounges. The hollow screen on the wall continued displaying news reports. Another commentator was discussing the concert. Another was replaying the duet. Another was analyzing the discovery of Unchained Melody. And somehow, every report eventually found its way back to the same subject. Robert and Lyra. Lyra rolled her eyes slightly. They're still talking about us. Robert chuckled. I noticed. A news anchor appeared on screen. The declaration has now become the most viewed concert moment of the year. Robert reached over, wrapped an arm around Lyra's shoulders, and gently pulled her closer. She immediately leaned into him. Without hesitation. Without thinking about it. Like it was the most natural thing in the universe. Robert smiled. You know. Lyra looked up. He glanced down at her. I'm glad I accepted the job. Her ears perked instantly. The security chief job? Robert nodded. Yeah. A small smile appeared. I'm glad I took it. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Otherwise I wouldn't be here with you. The smile that appeared on Lyra's face was immediate. Warm. Bright. Happy. I really wanted you to accept it. Robert laughed softly. I had a feeling. No. She shook her head. I mean, really wanted you to accept it. Her tail swayed behind her. When Pepper offered you the job, I was hoping you'd say yes. A pause. Very much. Robert smiled. I think I made the right choice. Lyra reached up, placed her hand gently against his cheek. The news continued talking in the background. Neither paid much attention anymore. For a moment they simply looked at each other. Comfortable. Happy. Content. Then Lyra spoke. A little nervously. Robert? Yeah? Her ears tilted slightly. A sign he had learned meant she was feeling vulnerable. I want us to move into the same room. Robert blinked. Lyra continued quickly. There's a larger room on the tour ship. She smiled softly. We could claim it. For a moment Robert simply stared. Then he laughed quietly. You've already planned this, haven't you? Maybe. Maybe? A little. Robert shook his head. Still smiling. It would make things easier. Lyra's tail immediately sped up. Easier? Robert nodded. Sure. A playful smile appeared. It would be easier to give you private concerts. Lyra immediately laughed. That's your first reason? It seems important. It does. They both laughed. Then Robert leaned forward. Gently kissed her. A soft kiss. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just affectionate. When they separated, he rested his forehead lightly against hers. Lyra's eyes closed. A small smile appearing again. The station. The concert. The news. The crowds. Everything else felt very far away. Robert wrapped both arms around her, holding her close. Without thinking about it, Lyra's tail slid around his waist. Comfortable. Protective. Affectionate. Neither seemed eager to move. The news anchor continued talking. Analysts suggest the relationship between the echoes of Terra vocalist and the band's security chief. Robert muted the hollow screen. Much better. Lyra laughed. Agreed. For a few moments neither spoke. Then Lyra looked up. You know something? What? Her smile softened. I don't think I'm ever going to get tired of being around you. Robert smiled. I don't think I'm going to get tired of being around you either. Lyra's ears immediately perked. Good. Good? She nodded. Because I plan on staying around for a very long time. Robert laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. Outside the ship, Enceladus continued its orbit around Saturn. Inside, two people who had started as strangers sat together on a couch, holding each other, talking about the future. And neither of them could imagine wanting to be anywhere else. For the first time in a long time, Robert felt completely certain about something. Accepting Pepper's job offer had changed his life. Not because it made him security chief. Not because it put him on a tourist ship. Not because it made him famous. Because it had led him to Lyra. And as Lyra settled comfortably against him, he found himself thinking that was the best decision he had ever made. The tour continued. Enceladus was now behind them. The concert had been a tremendous success. The news coverage had continued for days. Kasia was still somehow finding new ways to tease Robert and Lyra. And now the echoes of Terra Tour had reached its next destination. Europa. One of the great moons of Jupiter. The shuttle station was busy. Travelers moved between terminals. Cargo drones floated overhead. Announcements echoed softly through the massive structure. And beyond the station's transparent viewing wall, Jupiter dominated the sky. Huge. Beautiful. Impossible to ignore. The band stood together near one of the arrival gates. Waiting. Robert kept glancing toward the arriving passengers. Lyra stood right beside him. Not merely beside him. Attached to him. Both of her arms were wrapped comfortably around one of his. Robert's hand rested around her waist. Neither seemed to notice they were doing it anymore. It had simply become normal. Kasia noticed. Of course she noticed. You two know you're standing close enough to violate several safety regulations, right? Lyra didn't even look at her. No. Kasia grinned. I respect the commitment. Pepper sighed. Naomi pretended not to hear anything. A few moments later, passengers began emerging from the arrival gate. Families. Business travelers. Tourists. Workers. Robert suddenly smiled. There's Lynn. Lyra immediately perked up. Her ears rose. Her tail swished excitedly. Then she raised a hand. Lynn! Several people turned. One very surprised woman looked up from her luggage. Then smiled. There you are! Lynn waved back and headed toward them. The moment she arrived, Robert stepped forward and took her luggage. Long trip? Lynn laughed. A little. Then she looked around. Wow! Her gaze moved across the band. Across the station. Across Jupiter visible through the windows. Then back to Robert. You live like this now? Robert laughed. Apparently. Lynn smiled. Then looked toward Lyra. The Vulpine singer immediately smiled back. For a moment Lynn looked between the two of them. Then at how Lyra was still holding on to Robert. Then at how Robert clearly wasn't objecting. Then back to Lyra. A knowing smile appeared. Yep. Kasia immediately started laughing. What? Lynn asked. You figured it out faster than most news analysts. Pepper nodded. Considerably faster. Robert decided to change the subject. Lynn, we couldn't get you front row seats. Lynn immediately looked disappointed. Oh. Robert winced slightly. I'm sorry. Then Lyra stepped forward. But we could get you this. She held out a small card. A VIP pass. Lynn blinked. Then stared. Then stared some more. Her eyes widened. You're kidding. Lyra smiled warmly. I hope that's okay. For a moment Lynn looked completely speechless. Then she laughed. Okay? She accepted the pass carefully. Like it was something precious. Lyra, this is amazing. Then before the Vulpine singer could react, Lynn stepped forward and hugged her. A warm, sisterly hug. Lyra froze briefly. Surprised. Then happily returned it. Robert smiled. Kasia immediately whispered. Oh no. Pepper already knew where this was going. What? Robert asked. Kasia pointed. They've adopted each other. Naomi looked once. Assessment appears accurate. Lynn finally stepped back. Still smiling. Thank you? Lyra smiled right back. You're welcome. Then, after a brief pause, I'm glad you're here. The sincerity caught Lynn slightly off guard. She glanced at Robert. Then back at Lyra. I'm glad too. And she meant it. Because after seeing the broadcasts, after seeing the concert, after hearing Robert talk about her, Lynn had wanted to know one thing. Whether Lyra was genuinely kind. Now she had her answer. Absolutely. As the group began heading toward the tour shuttle, Lynn fell into step beside them. Kasia immediately moved closer. So? Lynn looked at her. Kasia smiled mischievously. I have approximately 600 stories. Robert groaned. Lyra laughed. And for the first time since arriving on Europa, Lynn felt completely at ease. She wasn't just visiting a concert. She was visiting friends. And maybe, just maybe, watching the beginning of something that would last a very long time. The Europa concert had been everything the band hoped for. The crowd had sung along, cheered, laughed, cried. And by the end of the night, nobody wanted it to end. The final song faded. The audience rose to their feet. Thunderous applause filled the dome. Then a chant started somewhere near the front. A few voices at first. Then more. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Duet! 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 Kasia immediately grinned. Oh, they're demanding content. Pepper laughed. Naomi looked toward Robert. The audience kept chanting. Duet! 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 Lyra looked at Robert. Her ears perked. Robert already knew exactly what they wanted. He smiled. I guess we should give them one. The crowd erupted. A few minutes later, Robert and Lyra stood together beneath the stage lights once more. Hand in hand. The opening notes of Can't Help Falling in Love filled the dome. And once again they sang together. This time Robert wasn't nervous. Not really. Whenever he felt the crowd becoming overwhelming, he remembered Naomi's advice. One person. So he looked at Lyra. And Lyra looked at him. The rest became easy. When the final note ended, the audience erupted again. Robert and Lyra stood together, still holding hands. Then Lyra stepped closer. Their foreheads touched gently. The crowd somehow became even louder. Thousands of people cheering. Not for celebrities. Not for performers. For two people who clearly cared about each other. Eventually the band waved goodbye and left the stage. Later, during dinner, everyone was in unusually good spirits. Lynn sat smiling, still processing everything she had seen. I loved the concert. Lyra brightened immediately. Really? Lynn laughed. Really? Robert smiled. That was actually the final concert in space for the year. Wait, really? Robert nodded. After this we're heading back to Earth. Lyra looked toward Lynn. Then smiled warmly. You should come back with us. Lynn blinked. What? You won't have to take a separate shuttle. A pause. And I'd like it if you came. Lynn's smile softened. I'd like that too. The day had been long. The concert exhausting. The celebrations even more so. By the time Robert and Lyra finally reached their room, both were ready to relax. The moment the door closed behind them, the noise of the outside world disappeared. No crowds. No cameras. No interviews. Just them. Lyra immediately wrapped her arms around him. Robert laughed softly. Tired? A little. She rested her head against his chest. Then looked up at him. I love you? The words came easily now. Natural. Robert smiled. I love you too. Lyra's tail immediately swayed. And for a while, either of them worried about anything beyond that moment. Breakfast had ended. The ship was preparing for departure. Kasia, Pepper, Naomi, and Lynn were gathered in one of the common lounges. Kasia was halfway through telling another story. And then Lyra looked at him like he'd personally invented music. Lynn laughed. Pepper shook her head. Naomi was quietly listening. That was when Robert walked in. Kasia immediately noticed. And immediately stopped talking. Robert looked nervous. Very nervous. Kasia narrowed her eyes. Oh no. Robert stopped. What? Kasia pointed. You have the face. The face? The serious face. Pepper looked up. She's right. Naomi nodded. Elevated stress indicators. Lynn smiled. What happened? Robert rubbed the back of his neck. Then took a deep breath. Kasia pointed dramatically. Knife guy. A pause. Just say it. The room grew quiet. Robert looked at all four of them. Then finally spoke. I want to marry Lyra. Silence. Then, Lynn immediately smiled. Pepper smiled too. Naomi looked unsurprised. Kasia launched herself off the couch. I knew it! The entire lounge erupted into laughter. Robert groaned. Kasia pointed triumphantly. I called this 6 planets ago. You call everything. And I am often correct. Pepper finally stood. Then walked over to Robert. Her expression softened. Do you love her? Robert answered immediately. Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty. Pepper nodded once. Then you already have my support. Robert visibly relaxed. Naomi spoke next. Statistically expected outcome. Robert laughed. Thank you, Naomi. She nodded. You're welcome. Then Lynn stood. And gave him a quick hug. I'm happy for you. Robert smiled. Thanks. Then all eyes turned toward Kasia. Kasia immediately adopted her most serious expression, which somehow made everyone trust her less. She walked over, looked Robert directly in the eyes, then pointed a finger at him. If she says yes. A dramatic pause. You are legally required to let me tell the story of how she accidentally claimed you in front of the entire solar system. Robert laughed. Kasia. I'm serious. Kasia. Fine. She grinned. Then hugged him anyway. I'm happy for you, knife guy. A pause. Now go buy a ring before Lyra beats you to the proposal. The room exploded into laughter once more. And for the first time since he'd decided what he wanted to do, Robert felt completely at peace. Because the people who mattered most already felt like family. And every one of them was rooting for him. The laughter from Kasia's last comment was still fading when Robert reached into his jacket pocket. At first nobody paid much attention. Then he carefully placed a small velvet box on the table. The room immediately became quiet. Kasia's eyes narrowed. Pepper stopped smiling. Naomi looked up from her tablet. Lynn leaned forward. Robert slowly opened the box. Inside were 2 wedding rings. Simple. Elegant. Beautiful. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Kasia pointed dramatically. I knew it! The entire room burst into laughter. Robert covered his face. Kasia. No. She stood up. No, absolutely not. She pointed at the rings. You already had the rings. A pause. You sneaky human. Robert couldn't help laughing. Kasia carefully picked up the box. The teasing immediately disappeared from her expression for a moment. The rings genuinely were beautiful. Simple polished bands with subtle engraved patterns running around the edges. Not flashy. Not expensive looking. Just meaningful. Kasia smiled. They're perfect. Pepper nodded. They really are. Naomi looked at them briefly. Aesthetically pleasing. Lynn laughed. That is Naomi's version of high praise. It is. Kasia carefully passed the box to Pepper. Then to Naomi. Then to Lynn. Each of them examined the rings. Each smiled. Each approved. Finally the box returned to Robert. Pepper folded her arms. When did you get them? Robert looked slightly guilty. Last concert. Silence. Pepper blinked. Kasia blinked. Lynn blinked. Naomi blinked. Then all 4 spoke at once. What? Robert laughed. When we were near Saturn. Kasia immediately sat back down, completely amazed. You bought the rings before asking us? Robert shrugged. I was pretty sure what the answer was going to be. Kasia pointed at him again. You bought engagement rings while Lyra was busy being adorable and nobody noticed. Basically. Kasia stared. Then slowly nodded. That's actually impressive. Lynn smiled warmly. You really love her, don't you? Robert answered without hesitation. More than anything. The room became quieter. Pepper smiled softly. Naomi nodded once. Lynn looked genuinely happy. Even Kasia's expression softened. Only for a moment. Then the teasing returned. Okay. She crossed her arms. I have an important question. Robert sighed. Here we go. Kasia grinned. What are you asking her? The room immediately focused on him again. Robert looked around. Then smiled nervously. Tonight. Silence. Then all four women simultaneously lit up. Tonight? Robert laughed. Tonight. Pepper immediately pointed at Kasia. You. Kasia pointed at herself. Me? Yes, you. Pepper narrowed her eyes. You are not allowed to accidentally tell Lyra. Kasia placed a hand over her heart. I would never. Nobody believed her. Not even slightly. Pepper continued staring. Kasia finally sighed dramatically. Fine. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and announced, I will not let my brother Robert down. The room became silent. The statement hung there. Then Pepper smiled. Naomi smiled. Lynn smiled. All three looked at Kasia. Then, completely in unison, they said, Good. Kasia laughed. Robert laughed. Even Pepper joined in. And for the first time that day, Robert felt the nervousness returning. Because now it was real. The rings were ready. The plan was ready. The blessing of everyone who mattered was ready. And in only a few hours, he would ask the most important question of his life. Hopefully. Very hopefully. Lyra would say yes. That evening, something unusual happened. Every member of the tour's ship had been invited to dinner. Not just the band. Not just management. Not just security. Everyone. Engineers. Technicians. Pilots. Maintenance crews. Kitchen staff. Medical personnel. The captain. All 80 crew members. Every seat in the dining hall was occupied. The room buzzed with curiosity. People whispered to each other, trying to figure out why everyone had been gathered together. At one table, Kasia was trying very hard not to grin. And failing. Pepper kept giving her warning looks. Naomi sat quietly, though even she looked unusually interested. Lynn smiled to herself, knowing exactly what was coming. Lyra, meanwhile, had absolutely no idea. She sat beside Robert, holding his hand beneath the table. Perfectly content. Perfectly unsuspecting. Dinner arrived. Plates were set down. Drinks were poured. Conversations began. Then Robert stood up. The room immediately grew quiet. 80 crew members turned toward him. The captain raised an eyebrow. Robert smiled nervously. Before everyone starts eating. A pause. If you could give me about 5 minutes. The room became completely silent. The captain nodded. You have the floor. Robert took a breath. Then looked at Lyra. And gently took her hand. Lyra! She blinked. What? Robert stood. Then carefully helped her to her feet. The room was now watching closely. Kasia looked seconds away from exploding. Pepper had already covered her face. Naomi had stopped pretending not to know. Lynn was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Robert took both of Lyra's hands in his. Then looked into her eyes. The room disappeared. The crowd disappeared. The ship disappeared. Only Lyra remained. Lyra! His voice was soft. Steady. Sincere. We've been through a lot together. Lyra's ears slowly lowered. Not from sadness. From emotion. Robert continued. When I accepted this job, I thought I was joining a tour. A small laugh moved through the room. I didn't expect my life to change. He glanced briefly toward the others. I gained friends. He looked at Pepper. A family. He looked at Naomi. A captain who somehow still lets me work here. The captain laughed. Robert looked at Kasia. And 4 sisters I never expected to have. Kasia immediately started crying. Stop making me emotional. The room laughed. Robert smiled. Then looked toward Lynn. And one of my oldest friends who came all the way to Europa to be here. Lynn wiped at her eyes. Then Robert turned back to Lyra. The vulpine singer was already beginning to tear up. What is this about? She asked softly. Water had begun gathering in her eyes. Robert smiled. Then continued. Lyra! You know I love you. The tears immediately started falling. And I know you love me. Lyra covered her mouth. The room was completely silent. Not a single person moved. Then Robert smiled. So I think it's time we do the next thing. And then he dropped to one knee. The entire dining hall gasped. Several crew members immediately started crying. Kasia made a noise somewhere between a squeal and an explosion. Pepper closed her eyes. Naomi smiled. Lynn immediately began crying. Lyra froze. Completely froze. Because now she knew. Before Robert even spoke again. She knew. Her tears doubled instantly. Joy. Pure joy. Her hands trembled. Her tail wrapped around one leg. And she couldn't stop crying. Not because she was sad. Because she was happier than she had ever been in her entire life. Robert opened the small ring box. The room collectively lost its mind. Inside sat the ring. Beautiful. Simple. Perfect. Robert looked up at her. His own eyes slightly wet now. Lyra! She was already nodding. Already crying. Already smiling. But Robert asked anyway. Will you be mine? A pause. And marry me? Lyra completely broke. The tears came faster. She laughed. She cried. She nodded repeatedly. Then somehow managed to answer. Yes. A pause. Then louder. Yes. Then she laughed through tears. Yes, 1,000,000 times. Another sob escaped. Forever. The dining hall erupted. Cheers. Applause. Whistles. Celebration. The captain stood and applauded. Engineers cheered. The kitchen staff were crying. Someone in the back yelled, Way to go, knife guy! The entire room laughed. Before Robert could even stand, Lyra launched herself at him. The chair behind her nearly tipped over. She wrapped both arms around him. Robert caught her instinctively. And the two embraced tightly, holding each other as the room celebrated around them. Then Lyra kissed him. Passionately. Without a single ounce of embarrassment. Without caring who was watching. Without caring about anything except him. The applause somehow became even louder. Kasia was openly crying now. Though she was still teasing. I called it. She pointed dramatically. I have been right for months. Pepper laughed through tears. You have. Naomi nodded. Documented evidence confirms this. Lynn wiped her eyes. Then smiled at both of them. Happier than she'd been in years. Because her friend had found exactly what he deserved. Someone who loved him completely. And as Robert slipped the ring onto Lyra's finger, the entire room stood. Every single person. Giving the newly engaged couple a standing ovation. And for several beautiful minutes, the dining hall of a tourist ship near Europa became the happiest place in the solar system. As Lyra held Robert tightly and admired the ring through tear-filled eyes, only one thought filled her mind. He chose me. And Robert, holding her just as tightly, had a thought of his own. She said yes. The dinner had long since turned from a proposal celebration into something softer. Not loud anymore. Not chaotic. Just warm. People slowly returned to their seats, still smiling, still whispering, still stealing glances at Robert and Lyra like they couldn't quite believe it had actually happened. Lyra still hadn't let go of his hand. Not even once. Later in the evening, as dessert was being served, Lynn leaned forward slightly. "So," she said, smiling, "where's the wedding going to be at?" The room perked up again immediately. Cash's eyes lit up. Pepper sighed like she already knew this was about to become a full planning session. Naomi tilted her head slightly, observing. Lyra blinked. Then looked at Robert. Then back at Lynn. "If you have an idea," she said softly, smiling, "let us know." She paused. Then her expression brightened. "Oh, and you already know you're a bridesmaid, right?" Lynn froze. Then her face completely lit up. "Wait, seriously?" Kasha leaned over. "Congratulations. You have been promoted into chaos." Lynn laughed, wiping at her eyes. "I accept this role." She thought for a moment. Then nodded. "My suggestion: Earth." Robert raised an eyebrow. Lynn continued. "Your band's theme is old Earth music. It feels right." A pause. "And if you're going to pick a place..." Her smile softened. "Hawaii is beautiful." Then she tilted her head. "But if I had to choose..." She looked at Lyra. "The Philippines." Lyra's ears lifted immediately. "Really?" Lynn nodded. "It's warm. It's alive. It's full of music and celebration." A pause. "And it would fit you too." Lyra turned to Robert instantly, smiling brightly. "I love that idea." Then she hugged Lynn tightly. "Thank you." Lynn hugged her back just as warmly. "Of course." Robert watched them for a moment. Then smiled. "Philippines it is." Lyra turned toward him, eyes shining. "Really?" Robert nodded. "Really." Kasha immediately leaned back in her chair. "I need everyone to understand that I am already planning emotional damage control for this wedding." Pepper shook her head. "You will not be needed," Kasha gasped. "I always am needed," Naomi calmly added. "Statistically false." Laughter filled the table again. Warm. Easy. 1 month later. Earth had never seen anything quite like it. The wedding of Lyra and Robert took place in Cebu City, Philippines. A venue chosen not for luxury, but for meaning, for music, for life. The guest list stretched far beyond anything traditional. The entire band. Lynn. Family members from both sides. The tour ship crew. Engineers. Security teams. Music collaborators. Friends who had become family. And even a few people who simply refused to miss the event after seeing the broadcast history. In total, 3,300 guests. The mayor of Cebu City personally officiated the ceremony. The ocean breeze carried soft music through the open-air venue. Lights shimmered across the water. The sky was calm. Perfect. And when Lyra walked down the aisle, there wasn't a single person who wasn't watching. Robert stood waiting. Nervous. Smiling. Completely certain. When their eyes met, Lyra stopped for just a second. Then smiled through happy tears. And kept walking. Because she already knew where she belonged. When they finally stood together at the altar, the world felt smaller again. Just like it always did when it was just the two of them. And when the vows were spoken, there wasn't a dry eye in the entire venue. Not even Kasha. Somehow especially not Kasha. When it was done, when the rings were exchanged, when the final words were spoken, they were married. And the entire crowd erupted. But as beautiful as the ceremony was, it was only the beginning of the celebration. Because the reception was waiting. Music. Food. Dancing. Stories. And a night that would become just as legendary as everything that had led them here. The beach was alive. Not just busy, alive. Lanterns floated above the sand in warm glowing clusters. Music drifted between the waves. The ocean itself seemed to shimmer with reflected color from the celebration lights strung across the shoreline. Tables stretched along the beach, heavy with food. Roasted pig, slow-cooked and seasoned the traditional Philippine way, sat at the center of the feast. Platters of roasted chicken were passed between guests, and bowls of rich, aromatic adobo filled the air with a scent that made even the off-world crew pause mid-conversation. It wasn't a banquet. It was a celebration of life. Robert and Lyra moved through it slowly. Not rushing. Not needing to. Just taking it all in. At one point, they noticed something that made both of them pause. Their parents were talking. Actually talking. Laughing even. Getting along as if they had known each other for years instead of days. Lyra's father shook his head slightly, smiling. "I had a feeling she'd end up with him," he said warmly. Then he added, glancing toward Robert across the crowd. "I liked him ever since he took a knife to his back for my daughter." Robert's parents exchanged a look, then laughed softly. "Well," his father said, "that was not exactly in the parenting handbook. But," his mother added, smiling, "we're glad it turned out this way." Robert stood quietly for a moment, listening to it all. Then he turned to Lyra. "Hey," he said gently, "can you go over to your parents for a couple of minutes?" Lyra blinked. "Why?" Robert smiled. "You'll see." Lyra narrowed her eyes slightly, but she was smiling. "All right." Then she leaned in and kissed his cheek before walking away. Robert watched her go. Then exhaled. And headed toward the stage set up at the edge of the beach. Standing near the equipment area was a familiar face. Shayla. The lead singer of Cosmic Nova. A wolf woman with black hair, matching ears, and a tail that swayed slightly as she watched the celebration. She raised an eyebrow as Robert approached. "Well," she said with a grin, "if it isn't the famous knife guy." Robert sighed. "I really need a new nickname." "No, you don't," she said immediately. "It's working for you." Robert smiled slightly. "Can I borrow your band for a song?" Shayla tilted her head. "For the wedding?" "Yes." She folded her arms. "What song?" Robert hesitated just slightly. 1984. Shayla's eyes lit up. Then she smiled wider. "Oh, I know what you're talking about." She glanced back toward her bandmates. "They know it too." A pause. Shayla gave a small nod. "Anything for Knife Guy on his wedding day." Within minutes, the stage was set. Cosmic Nova took position. Robert stepped forward and picked up the microphone. Across the beach, Lyra was still talking with her parents when the music shifted slightly. She paused, then turned. Her ears lifted. Her expression changed instantly. Confusion. Then curiosity. Then recognition of something important. From the stage, Robert spoke into the microphone. "Lyra!" A pause. "Can you join me for a dance?" Silence rippled across the beach. Guests turned. Heads lifted. Conversation faded. Lyra looked toward the stage. And saw him. Standing there. With Cosmic Nova behind him. Waiting. For her. Her breath caught. "What song is it this time?" she whispered to herself. Then she stepped forward. Slowly at first. Then faster. Robert held out his hand. She took it. And smiled. "I'm ready, guys," Robert said softly into the mic. The first notes began. "You're the inspiration." The reaction was immediate. Not loud. Not chaotic. Something deeper. The entire beach seemed to still. Even the waves felt quieter. Even the wind seemed to slow. Because this wasn't just a performance. It was a confession. Robert never looked away from Lyra. Not once. They began to dance. Slow. Close. Completely in sync without needing to think about it. Lyra's eyes softened as she listened to him sing. And the more he sang, the more she leaned into him. Like she belonged there. Like she always had. Around them, the 3,300 guests watched in silence. Some smiling. Some crying. Some holding hands. Some just frozen in the moment. Kasia wiped her eyes quickly. Okay, she muttered. This is illegal emotional content. Pepper didn't respond. She was clearly affected too. Naomi quietly said. Emotional saturation levels, extreme. The song built. Rose. Crescendoed. Then softened again. And through it all, Robert never broke eye contact with Lyra. Not even once. When the final note came, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then silence. A perfect silence. For half a second, nobody reacted. Like everyone needed time to return to reality. Then, the beach erupted. Applause. Cheers. Whistles. Cries of joy. And somewhere in the crowd, Encore, knife guy! Robert laughed breathlessly, still holding Lyra's hand. And Lyra? She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at him. Like the rest of the universe didn't exist anymore. And for that moment, it didn't. 1 month had passed since the wedding. 1 month since the beaches of Cebu. 1 month since the music, the vows, and the celebration that had brought together thousands of people from across the solar system. And after a wonderful honeymoon, life had finally begun to settle into something resembling normal. At least as normal as life could be for the lead singer of the most popular retro music band in known space and her husband, the legendary Knife Guy. Tonight was simple. Just family. Just friends. The people who mattered most. The gathering was held at Robert and Lyra's home. A long dining table filled the room. Lynn sat beside Kasia. Pepper and Naomi were already talking with Robert's parents. Lyra's parents sat nearby. Everyone was relaxed. Laughing. Enjoying themselves. Then the food arrived. Steaks. Mashed potatoes. Corn. Fresh homemade white bread. Gravy. Vegetables. Everything prepared from scratch. The smell alone filled the room. Kasia looked at the food. Then at Robert. Then back at the food. A pause. Wait. Another pause. You made this? Robert nodded. Actually, Lyra and I made dinner together. Lyra smiled proudly. The reactions were immediate. Pepper took a bite. Then looked genuinely impressed. Naomi nodded. This is excellent. Lynn laughed. Robert, is there anything you can't do? Kasia pointed dramatically. He sings. Points. He cooks. Points. He fixes spaceships. Points. He survives being stabbed. Points. He marries the prettiest Vulpine in the solar system. Lyra immediately blushed. Kasia threw both hands into the air. It's ridiculous. The entire table burst into laughter. Even Robert. Dinner continued. Conversation flowed easily. Stories were shared. Memories revisited. It felt perfect. Then Robert stood up. I'll grab some wine. Several people nodded. A few moments later he returned carrying a bottle. He stopped beside Lyra. You want a glass? Lyra shook her head. No wine for me. Robert blinked. Why? The room quieted slightly. Lyra smiled. A very specific smile. The kind of smile Robert had learned meant she was planning something. Then she casually placed a hand on her stomach. It's kind of a big no-no when you have a baby in your tummy. Silence. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The entire room froze. Robert froze. Pepper froze. Naomi froze. Lynn froze. Kasia looked like her brain had stopped functioning. For several seconds there was nothing. Then Robert spoke. Very carefully. A pause. Did we hear you right? Lyra's smile widened. Yes. More silence. Then, we're having a baby? Lyra nodded. Yes. Robert immediately leaned down and kissed her. Not caring who was watching. Not caring about anything except what she had just said. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were shining. You just made me so very happy. A pause. Again. Lyra laughed. A few happy tears appeared in her eyes. Then Robert asked the obvious question. Why didn't you tell me? Lyra smiled mischievously. Because I wanted to surprise everyone. Then she pointed at him. Even you, my loving husband. Robert laughed. At exactly the same moment, Kasia started laughing too. The timing was so perfect that everyone else joined in. Kasia pointed dramatically across the table. Lyra! What? You inherited my chaos. The room erupted. I absolutely did not. You absolutely did. I learned from the best. Kasia immediately placed a hand over her heart. That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. Pepper groaned. Naomi quietly added. Evidence supports Lyra's statement. The laughter became even louder. Then another realization struck the room. Robert's parents looked at each other. Lyra's parents looked at each other. Then both couples spoke at exactly the same time. We're going to be grandparents. The excitement was immediate. Both mothers were already emotional. Both fathers were grinning. Lynn wiped at her eyes. Oh, this is wonderful. Pepper smiled warmly. Naomi looked genuinely happy. Even Kasia had become emotional. Though naturally she tried to hide it. And failed. Completely. For a while the room filled with excited conversation. Ideas. Questions. Dreams. Plans. But eventually Robert found himself looking around the table. At Lynn. At the band. At his parents. At Lyra's parents. At the family they had all become. Then he looked at Lyra. His wife. The woman who had changed his life. The woman who had once been just a singer he admired. The woman who was now carrying their child. Lyra looked back at him. Smiled. And gently took his hand. No words were needed. Because both of them already knew. The music. The adventures. The concerts. The laughter. The chaos. The love. None of it was ending. It was simply becoming something new. And as the people they loved filled the home with laughter and happiness, Robert realized something. The greatest thing he had ever found wasn't a lost song. It wasn't fame. It wasn't success. It was family. And surrounded by the people he loved most, with Lyra's hand in his and their future waiting ahead of them, Robert couldn't imagine a happier ending. Or a better beginning.